Clausewitz, the influential military strategist, wrote, "The center of gravity is the source of power that sustains the enemy." For centuries, military planners have searched for that center, a single point so vital that striking it could decide the outcome of a conflict. Today, we call this a critical node, the updated jargon-heavy term for what Clausewitz described so elegantly. And here, in the Gulf, lies one of the most important critical nodes on Earth, the backbone of global energy and origin to 49% of the world's oil and gas production. What I hope to show you is that this isn't just another conflict in the Middle East. It's different because this region has become the world's center of gravity, essential yet increasingly vulnerable and dangerously overburdened. And as tensions rise, we're left with one question: what happens if that center of gravity collapses? So here's some context. Iran has been in the crosshairs of Western oil-hungry war machines for decades. It's faced economic sanctions, cyber attacks, assassinations, and airstrikes. Meanwhile, neighboring countries like Iraq, Syria, and Libya have been invaded, bombed, or destabilized. But Iran? Well, it's stood firm so far, probably because, unlike its neighbors, Iran developed a potent asymmetric defense. By building a strong missile force and leveraging geography, Iran has turned itself into what I'm calling the hedgehog defense, a small, prickly adversary that's just too difficult to take on without having the wounds to show for it. Okay, let's take a closer look at how effective their strategy is. So far, Iran's missile arsenal has proven itself many times. After the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, Iranian missiles struck the US Al-Assad airbase in Iraq. The precision shocked observers, pinpoint hits with heavy payloads from range. Then came Operation True Promise 1, where missiles breached one of the most heavily defended airspaces in the world. And most recently, Operation True Promise 2. I want to dive a little deeper on Operation True Promise 2 because it was a pivotal moment that demands attention for what it reveals about a potential escalation involving Iran. This strike followed Israel's targeted killing of Ismail Haniyeh, head of Hamas's political wing, in an unprecedented attack on Iranian soil. Iran's response was swift and striking, targeting 3 critical locations: Tel Nof Air Base, Nevatim Air Base, and the Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv. The scale and precision of this operation were jaw-dropping. This volley of missiles penetrated some of the most advanced air defense systems in the world, leaving global military strategists stunned. So let's break this down. The first thing that stands out is that Iran's missiles faced layered defenses, including the David Sling system, which was purpose-built for Iranian ballistic missile threats. Then the Iron Dome, which engaged during the terminal phase of the attack. Both systems fired extensively but failed to intercept the missiles effectively. And an important note is that GPS guidance was rendered useless due to the electromagnetic jamming, yet the missiles struck their targets with pinpoint accuracy. This is important because GPS guidance is probably the cheapest and most accurate way to get missiles on target. Operation True Promise 2 wasn't just a military maneuver, it was a strategic statement, reshaping regional perceptions of Iran's capabilities and forcing its adversaries to reconsider the risks of escalation. The strike on the US Al-Assad base, Operation True Promise 1, and Operation True Promise 2 all spoke to a clear motive. They all had a definitive start and stop. They were all a retaliation to direct attacks on Iranian soil, and in all cases but Operation True Promise 2, lots of warning was given to the defender in advance. Little to no casualties were sustained on the defender's side, and finally, a level of accuracy was achieved that was previously reserved for the most advanced military forces. They wanted to showcase their capabilities in order to advance deterrence. Iran was telling Pax Americana, "I don't want to fight, but if it comes to it, look what I can do." Okay, in the event of all-out war, Iran has 4 critical nodes it could target. These aren't random. They're calculated moves designed to impose a large enough cost on the other side, with the hopes of avoiding a prolonged conflict. First up, and probably a target they'd save for last, is oil sites in the region. 49% of the world's oil supply comes from Iran's backyard. Striking these sites would be a global shockwave, a nuclear option without the need for nuclear weapons. In 2019, the Houthi demonstrated just how fragile these sites are, with a single strike on Saudi facilities causing a 20% spike in oil prices. Now, imagine that on a much larger scale. A second critical node is the Strait of Hormuz, where 21% of global oil supply passes through this narrow choke point. Even a partial blockade would cripple energy flows. The Houthi in Yemen, operating with limited resources, have repeatedly shown how easily they can disrupt vital routes. Armed with basic drones and missiles, they've carried out precision strikes and enforced blockades in the Red Sea, targeting shipping and critical infrastructure. If a non-state actor can achieve this level of disruption, imagine the capabilities of Iran, a nation with advanced drones, cruise missiles, and anti-ship systems. The Strait of Hormuz would be nearly impossible to secure against Iran's arsenal without a full-scale military operation. Finally, the US boasts unparalleled military power, but to project it globally, it relies on one critical asset: aircraft carriers. With 11 aircraft carriers in its fleet and 3 to 4 typically deployed at any given time, these floating fortresses are the backbone of American force projection, capable of turning any ocean into a battlefield. Without them, many US bases around the world would be indefensible and unsustainable. These aircraft carriers are immense, the size of floating cities. You could fit the entire population of the Falkland Islands aboard one and still have room for over 1,000 more sailors. But their size is also their greatest vulnerability. Large, slow-moving, and always within range of prying eyes, they are meticulously tracked by adversaries like China and Russia. And in the event of conflict, you could bet that Iran would receive real-time data from them. Aircraft carriers have long been a target of interest for Iran and its allies. Vice Admiral Brad Cooper remarked on the growing threat posed by smaller actors like the Houthis, stating, "The Houthi have demonstrated a persistent ability to target commercial shipping and military vessels, employing a range of tactics that require constant vigilance and adaptability on our part." In military speak, that translates to, it's raining missiles out there. And take it for what it is, but rumors even suggest that the Houthi may have hit a US aircraft carrier in one of their probes. True or not, such incidents provide invaluable data for Iran to refine its targeting. Of course, US carriers aren't defenseless. They are surrounded by gauntlets of defenses, including multi-million-dollar SM-3 missiles capable of intercepting threats at range, but Iran doesn't intend to win with the quality of its weapons. It plans to overwhelm these defenses with sheer volume. When defending a $13 billion carrier means firing $2 million SM-3s against a swarm of $20,000 Shahab missiles, Iran's strategy becomes clear. Quantity becomes a quality of its own. When I was researching this topic, there's a lot of gray area hidden behind the cloak of secrecy. But one thing that was super clear was the economic fallout, which would be catastrophic. Oil prices would skyrocket, inflation would spiral, and global markets would plummet. China, which imports 40% of its oil from the Middle East, would face factory shutdowns and export slowdowns. Everyday goods it produces for the world would become unaffordable. It wouldn't just be an oil crisis, it would be a global economic collapse. Really, there's only one word to describe the removal of 49% of the global oil and gas supply would look like for the world, and that's apocalyptic. And I really feel people aren't talking about this enough. But if you want to look on the bright side, for those still in a job, less traffic. Here's what I think it would look like if a full-scale war broke out. After the recent strikes on Iranian nuclear and air defense sites, Iran waits, and then retaliates. The response isn't impulsive, it's calculated. Precision missiles target Israeli assets, escalating tensions into a series of carefully planned volleys between the two nations. For a time, it's a back-and-forth exchange, missiles, drones, and airstrikes flying between Iran and Israel. Both sides trade blows, each trying to subdue its opponent into submitting. But the United States remains on the sidelines. It isn't until pressure mounts from powerful lobbying groups that the US decides to act. And when it does, it's with overwhelming force. Hundreds of high-speed anti-radiation missiles launched from F-18 Hornets make contact with Iran's air defense systems, while waves of cruise missiles target key Iranian oil infrastructure. Iran would still be in the fight with well-protected stockpiles of drones and, most importantly, ballistic missiles. Iran's response is immediate and also symbolic. A partial blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, this narrow choke point, through which 21% of global oil supply flows, becomes the first move in a high-stakes game of brinkmanship. It's Iran's way of saying, we can and we will destroy the global economy if pushed. At this stage, the world holds its breath. Diplomacy could still step in, but if it fails, the situation spirals towards full-scale invasion. For Iran, this would mean the destruction of decades of carefully built deterrence and billions of dollars in infrastructure reduced to rubble. A recovery could take generations. And for the rest of the world, well, the consequences would be catastrophic, to say the least. With Iran backed into a corner, it's almost certain that they'd play their final card, striking oil facilities across the region. The results wouldn't be a crisis. It would be the collapse of the global economy, sending us back into the Stone Age. Clausewitz described the center of gravity as the source of power that sustains a system. It's the foundation everything else depends on. But that also highlights what we should protect. And if the challenger is willing to talk it out instead of fight, taking the route of diplomacy should be the only choice. These systems we depend on are fragile. The Gulf's energy powers factories in China, fuels transportation in Europe, and keeps supply chains moving across the Americas. A single disruption here doesn't stay local. It ripples outwards, touching every corner of the globe. In the case of Iran, strength isn't measured by destruction. It's measured by what we can preserve.